Hi, Mike. Thanks. Thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for asking.
So I'm talking to Mike Denson. And Mike, where are you talking from right now?
I'm in the country. I live 14 miles from the nearest store in East Texas. So I'm about an hour and a half southeast of Dallas in the country.
And when you say the country, is like is it just like ranch, vast lands, a ranch with oil stuff happening? Is that it?
There's a little oil here. There's a little oil. Not much oil today as there used to be in East Texas. It's hilly here, very forested, kind of like what you might find in Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, pine, hardwoods.
Okay.
But
any refineries around there?
The closest refinery is probably in Houston, Texas, which is about 2.5 hours south.
Okay, so you don't smell anything, right?
No.
Yeah, I used to live next to a refinery. This is why I'm me and you're you. You see? Hey, Nathaniel. Okay, Mike. Do you have because of this war game? I'm going to ask you. Do you have a military background?
No.
That's interesting. And how many war games have you done?
Designed.
I'm sorry.
One.
That's even more interesting.
This is the first and only one.
now I've got the last 100 yards, the Airborne over Europe, Volume 2. The last 100 yards, Volume 1. A lot of people say, like, I like the system. I like the system. So where did you get the system? Who did you steal from? Who inspired you? This and that, because a lot of people are saying this is close to true combat type thing. So you not having a military background, I'm surprised.
Well, I've been playing war games now for 60 years. I've always been a big military history fan, any history really, but military. And all types, World War II, ancients, Napoleonic, American Civil War, and I read extensively about history. So when I did this, the main theme here is that I want to model small unit behavior in combat, not the weapon systems. You know, plenty of games model the weapon systems, okay? But, you know, I want to model the behavior.
Okay.
So that's kind of the theme.
So morale is a huge thing in this game then.
Well, probably no more different than any other tactical game. You know, you basically morale or cohesion is your defensive value. That's what you're generally rolling the die against.
Okay.
But I want players to get the best thing you can do is tell a good story. I want that player playing that platoon leader or company commander to feel some of those pressures that real commander might feel in the field. You know, he has an objective. He doesn't have forever to achieve that objective, so time is a factor. But more importantly, he cannot control that time. He can't control the time. And the other big factor there is is casualties. You know, you can't have your last half squad left and control a building and you lost a whole company and say you won a game.
No.
Okay. So really he's under pressure to, you know, minimize the casualties of his troops that he's known and gotten to know, and you know, so those factors are drivers for the game. So because you feel the pressure of you either behind schedule, ahead of schedule, you're taking too many casualties. You know, at some point you say, well, I'm going to quit and I want to fight another day. And that's kind of how it is.
And how did you model that? Is that the modeling of the action reaction?
Well, that part really is more a factor of how you score and who wins the game. Generally, you have an objective, and if you take your objective, it doesn't mean you win. Now you have to calculate the score. So the final score is based on how much time has elapsed, and that's going to be modified by your casualty differential. So for example, if you had an objective to take a hill and you had to take it, to win though, you had to have a final score of 35 or less. Okay, so let's say, for example, that it was 32 minutes, which means you would have won. Well, but if you had 2 more casualties than your enemy, you're going to have to add 6 casualty points to your time, which 32 minutes plus 6 points for casualties is now 36. So you didn't win, you got a draw. So it's a function of time and casualty difference that dictates whether you win the mission or not.
So there's no fighting till the last man type thing?
No.
Okay, no. Is that a model of a fog of war?
It's just a measure of your success. I mean, if you have to take the hill and you took 3 hours to do it, that's not really success. If you had to take the hill and you lost 50% of your troops, that's not success. So it's a combination of the two.
Are there any degrees of success, like a strategic win? I don't know the exact lingo, but you know what I'm trying to say? Do you either... Yeah.
Typical, you have the attacker wins, there's a draw, or defender wins. Okay. So you have a range. So for example, if the mission says the Americans win if the score is 35 or less. Okay. It's a draw if it's 36 to 45, and the Germans win if it's 46 or greater.
So there's no level like a tactical win, tactical decisive win, a strategic win, an operational win. It's yes or no type thing, right?
Pretty well, it's yes, no, or draw. It's win, lose, or draw.
Okay. Who did you model? Who inspired you to model that mechanic? Like, what did you draw from?
I don't really remember.
Like, are you really a tactical player, or did you play strategic or operational games?
Well, I've always preferred operational games or grand tactical. I've had friends, and I played ASL for years. I've got Combat Commander. Okay. I've tried 2 or 3 of the others, the Otrabrook system, the Oyu Kinto, what was it, Panzer.
Right.
So, I've done a lot of tactical things, but most of those do more about modeling the weapon systems than they do.
Right.
For example, I mean, you're not going to have a half-track driver that's going to drive 200 yards and move into a hex with a Panther tank just to tie up the Panther tank. I mean, you'll never get a half-track driver to do that, okay? Okay. That's not going to happen. I mean, I know that, it might tie up that tank, but in real life, it ain't going to tie up the tank. And,
no.
And neither's the driver going to do it. So
no.
So, you in the game, for example, taking half tracks, yeah, you can do that, but it's really vulnerable. You're going to lose a half track. Well, a half track counts as a casualty. It's a real cheap casualty. Okay. If you have infantry, the infantry can disrupt and fall back and not take a casualty. But if you have a vehicle or a gun or a tank, there's no falling back. There's no regrouping, and there's no just recovery unless it's shocked. But most of the time, it's an easy kill. So if you have a limit of 3 casualties that you can take before you exceed your differential level,
you want to keep your half track back, yeah.
And so they're just an easy kill. You can kill them with that. You can kill them with machine guns.
A half track.
Yeah, and they weren't.
They weren't heavily armored?
American half-tracks side armor was about maybe 1/4 of an inch. Well, at about 200 yards, you can penetrate that with an armor-piercing 30 caliber round. And so half-tracks were not armored fighting vehicles. They were carriers to transport, and the reason they were used is because they were half-track and they could go places and keep up with the armor that trucks could not.
Right.
They never were intended to assault the enemy.
I'm going to take a question here from one of my I call that the peanut gallery because I keep forgetting the commenters. Nathaniel here.
Oh, please do.
So Nathaniel's seen comments of your system is a fresh alternative to ASL. Does that ring a bell? Hit a bad chord, a good chord? Was it your intention to be innovative like that?
Well, I played ASL for 20 years. It's a good game. It has its strengths. In my view, it's a little dated today. It's weapons based. I mean, you model weapons. It's a good game. I'm influenced by ASL. I'm influenced by a lot of tactical games in the sense that it's all tactical. You got a gun or you got a tank, you got an infantry squad. So, you can't help but be influenced in somewhat. I mean, there are squads in all these tactical games.
Right.
So, I didn't set out to be different. I set out to try and find solutions. I don't like all the die rolls. One of the things I don't like about ASL and a lot of tactical games is that, you move one hex and you say, do you want to shoot? You move into another hex. Do you want to shoot? You want to shoot? Well, assuming you were looking in the first place, okay, but I don't like making all those die rolls. I mean, it's simple as this. If say, for example, if you move through 4 hexes in your line of sight, and just for simplicity's sake, there's a 20% chance in each hex that you're going to get an effect, okay? Well, I just soon wait till you get to 3rd hex and just roll for 50%. Why stop on each hex along the way? Now, the other big difference in this game is that in order to try and create a simultaneous feel, because that was one of my primary objectives, how do you get simultaneous feelings in a tactical board game with cardboard counters? So I reduced the time frame. Units don't move as far, so there's a lot more snapshots. So really, when you compare the two, it's like, well, how many, if I'm closing from 10 hexes and I can only move 2 or 3 hexes at a time versus 5 or 6, how many shots are you going to get at me before I get to the objective? Well, if I can move 5, you're only going to get 2 shots. But in this game, you may take 4 or 5 to get there. So now you're going to get 4 or 5 shots. So when you look at the numbers, it's just a matter of averaging it out to what feels to be a fairly accurate result. Most games, too, all games, the casualties are way, way too high. Okay? I've studied DuPie. I've looked at the American Civil War. I've walked over battlegrounds. And, you got to think that the American Civil War, which it was extremely high casualties.
Very high.
It had more people die from wounds and from disease and everything else than you did in combat. When you really look at KIAs, it's amazingly low. You study DuPie, which he studied numerous different engagements in World War II, and you looked at the casualty rate of actually KIAs and wounds and missing, now it's not to say that you can't get somebody wiped out, but when you look at the average, casualties are much higher in most games. We're human beings. When the heat gets too hot, we're going to fall back and try again. We're going to fall back and regroup. One of the things about Last 100 Yards is really cool, and I didn't necessarily, there are a lot of things that happen in Last 100 Yards that I did not set out to design. It's actually, they ended up being the result of something that I did. I'd like to tell you that I'm smart enough to say, oh, I wanted it to be this way. But for example, in the Last 100 Yards, I might have a machine gun section and a leader, which might be, all together 8 or 10 men on a hilltop dug in. and a platoon, you know, is trying to assault up this hill to take them out. Well, that platoon may take 2 or 3 tries. It's going to get disrupted. It may fall back. It may win it the first case. But the big thing is that you fall back, you regroup, you try again. You fall back, you regroup, you try again. Well, the downside is that every time you fall back and regroup, you're losing time. Okay? So it's really not so much of casualties. Most games, it's one and done. I'm going to assault the hill and somebody's blasted away and it's done. In this game, you know, you actually may have to take 2 or 3 attempts to take a position, not just one.
So you're saying in every scenario, there's a time factor involved. You gotta reach this objective in, let's say, half an hour. Is that right?
Well, it's really based on the final score, but the score takes into account time and casualties.
Okay, right? Okay.
Now, time is not constant. In combat, you know, 1 minute can seem like forever. In other cases, 1 minute may seem like, you know, it's just a matter. And in combat, it's not, these are mostly firefights. They're generally 30 to 40 minutes. You know, it's not 30 to 40 minutes of constant gunfire. There's moments of nothing happening, you know, that are interrupted by violent eruption of gunfire and assault. So time is warped. So in the game, you know, at the end of every game turn, you're going to roll a die to see how much time has elapsed. It's not the same. If you roll low, it may only be 2 or 3 minutes. If you roll high, it's 4 or 5 minutes. So time is a variable. You can't control time.
Mike, you having this system, we're going to call it this system, okay? And I'm sure it works. And how long, or are you planning on doing tactical games in the near future with this system, or are you changing to another scale type thing?
Well, there's other modules coming out. We have a mission pack that's up. We got a British Airborne module, Russian modules coming. You know, I'd like to tell you it's all in with the next year or so, but I mean, they take time to get done. But so yes, I am progressing with this, but I've already begun to explore using a similar system with American Civil War.
Oh, great. Okay.
And also with maybe at a company or battalion level. So for example, you know, you might have, and it maybe not necessarily always historic. You take missions or scenarios like in the last 100 yards or in ASL, for example. Well, you know, it's kind of like, yeah, the mission took place during that time, but it's not factual. So one of the thoughts I'm having is just do the same thing, but do it at a divisional level. So you may have a divisional set of generic units, and you can then, you know, you might do, well, what was the first division doing at Bastogne? Or you got the 1st Airborne Division in its 8 or 10 different engagements. So, but it's all, they were there, but it's not necessarily trying to be perfectly historical. I don't know if that made sense or not.
Yes, yes. I should have asked you this question to begin with. How soloable is this? There's no hidden information?
Well, some missions are going to be easier than others. I think, you know, I've had to do a lot of play tests solo, and I have play testers that play test it solo. I think it does a reasonable good job for solo without trying to create a solo module.
Gotcha.
Probably not, unless somebody steps forward and say, hey, Mike, I want to do a solo module for you. It's not something I'm going to be doing.
Okay, so nobody approached you at GMT to develop a solo bot. They said, this is a 2-player game. Let's go with that. Is that?
Well, I mean, they have some help and support, but after reviewing it, you know, it's not easily done
okay.
at this scale. Now, there are ways that players do it, like Mission 12 in the first module as a good example of how solo would work really well. It's kind of based on the solitaire ASL. But there's no AI per se. So what it is, for example, is that the Americans have a company of infantry and a platoon of tanks and a few half-tracks, and they're trying to basically clear the road for a couple of maps, okay, long ways. Well, the Germans, on each map, they get to place so many concealment markers. It specifies map 1 might be 5, map 2 is 6, map 3 or whatever. And so the German player puts the units listed, which happens to be a platoon and an infantry section, a couple anti-tank guns, a Tiger, a Panther, some machine guns. He puts those in a cup, okay? And so as the American moves forward, if he moves in line of sight of one of these question mark or one of these concealment markers, the German player rolls a die. If he rolls 5 or less, there's a unit there, so he draws a unit out of the cup and places it in that position, concealed. And if he draws 6 to 10, then there's no unit there. So for the player playing the Americans, it's kind of cool because it's unknown what he's going to draw and what he's going to encounter at any one time, but he still has to play both sides.
Right. And why make it a standalone game? And is that your plan to do the other expansions as standalone games?
Well, standalone, you mean
like like you don't need the first volume?
Well, that's not totally correct. So,
okay.
We just sent to the printer the Solomon Island, which is the Pacific Theater. All right. So to play the mission pack, well, we'll talk Europe first. So to play any of the European mission packs or future modules like Russia or Italy or North Africa that we may do, you're going to need volume 1 and 2.
Oh, I got you. Okay. Okay.
Because, you know, we're not going to reprint all the counters, the German counters, because that's really what you have to have. You know, not going to reprint the German counters for the new games. You're going to have those modules as the basis to play Europe. And it'll be the same thing with the Pacific. You'll have to have the first module to have the Japanese. Now, if there's any extra counters that want to be additions, then they'll come with that future module. But you'll have to have 1 and 2 to play Europe.
And these future modules, will they always be boxed? Or will they come as like a Ziploc bag, like Combat Commander type thing?
Right. The mission pack is nothing but 4 maps and 10 scenarios. Okay. So that'll just be a Ziploc.
Right.
The Russian and the British will most likely be boxed.
Boxed, yeah.
Okay.
I got you. Okay, let me see. Let me ask an intelligent question. Oh, yeah. Do you have any say in your game, and this could be a delicate question, in the marketing process of the game? Do you have any say? Or do you just design the game and hand it over?
Well, I'm retired, so I enjoy games. So before COVID, I probably attended 5 or 6 events a year. I went to Consignment World in Tempe, went to San Diego, went to Seattle. I'm going to Kansas City here at the end of this month. So I would go to events because I just like being there, and I would demo the game. Nobody asked me to, you know, that's just what I like to do.
Right, right.
So from a marketing perspective, I mean, I try and do a few things on Facebook or Board Game Geek.
Okay, so basically you take it upon yourself.
Well, but GMT does as well. They have it inside GMT. You know, we prepare articles. They'll run them in inside GMT.
Right.
I don't know that there's any game company that has multiple lines of games that, you know, that market beyond having their home page.
Right, right. I understand.
And, GMT especially, they probably got 150 games. You're not going to, what are you going to do? Market one each week? I don't know what they would do. So
that's why I said it. This is a stupid question. What do you?
No, it's not stupid. There's never a stupid question.
No, I want to look, Nathaniel.
Question here.
Yeah, he says, how flexible is your system? I know you say you're going to be doing this system to Civil War. How would it apply to World War I?
Well, I think this system is extremely flexible to any. It's certainly modern combat, World War I or greater. I think it's very flexible and easy to do. The key things is the final score and what we discussed already regarding how to win. Another really thing that's different is wherever there's an action, there's a reaction. If you're the active player, you get to do something with all your guys. You have to activate one platoon at a time, and you get to either fire, maneuver, or recover. And you get to do something with all of them. But if you're reacting, okay, unless you see something, you can't do anything. So if you didn't see the enemy unit conduct an action, then that guy can't do anything.
Right.
Now, there is an exception. If you're stacked with a leader, obviously he's there to give you a command. But otherwise, so this kind of helps avoid that situation where, being the eye in the sky, I have an aerial view, I can see everything. If you're a player, now you're going to use your terrain for reasons other than protection. You're going to use it for maneuver, because I'm going to maneuver and get as close as I can so before you can see me, okay? Because if I can do that, you don't get to move as long as I can keep the initiative. Simultaneous thing, the other thing is the fire combat. We don't resolve fire until all the actions are done.
And what about the reactions?
Doesn't matter. No. So we have what they call our DRM chits. Greens for small arms, yellows for anti-tank fire, and reds for indirect fire. So, for example, every time a unit fires, I place a corresponding marker on my target with the modifier, if it's minus terrain or whatever it is. So if it's a -1 or it's a +0 or plus whatever. So I may have a unit that's got 3 or 4 markers on him. Well, he can still move. He just takes the markers with him.
Right. And the DRMs. Yeah.
We're tracking fire. And so once all the platoons are activated, all the reactions done, then you resolve the fire. So you don't get to see what the results are. You can't, it's not sequential. You can't move a guy out and have someone shoot at him and then move someone else, because you already know the result. It's all done.
I see. Okay. No, so it's funny. I was thinking, wow, that's a little bit difficult. No, but that's pretty realistic. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I think it's pretty realistic. You move, the guy gets shot, you go help, whatever.
Well, it's much simpler to resolve combat as well. You're not interrupting your play with looking up, what the results are and applying the results and all that crap. So, for example, if you're going to assault my hex from 2 hexes away, you move adjacent, and I have 3 different people that shoot at you. So you have 3 markers on you, okay?
Right.
So at the end of your platoon activation cycle, you move your unit in my hex with 3 small arms markers on him.
Right.
You still don't know the result. So everything's done. You're assaulting me, but the first thing we do is going to resolve the fire. So I'm going to roll 3 die, 1 for each marker, take the single most detrimental result and apply it to you. So you may get in my hex, and you then may disrupt in my hex, which now your assault values have gone down. And so you don't know for sure what it's going to be. Okay,
so that's how you model the fog of war there. Okay. Now, is there any close combat if you're in the same hex as your enemy?
Well, yes. So we call it an assault. If you enter my hex, to assault an enemy unit, if you're infantry, you have to begin within 2 hexes. If you're adjacent, you just move in. He doesn't get to do anything. All the fire and everything that takes place in that 50 yards is calculated in the assault.
Right.
If you assault from a non-adjacent hex, you have to move adjacent, take all the enemy fire, and once that's completed, then you're moved in the hex. Okay?
If you can.
No, you still can. There's no results yet. You haven't resolved anything. You just take the markers with you. You don't move it in there at the end of the game turn. You move it in at the end of the platoon activation cycle that you just finished.
Okay, I got it. Now, this action reaction, basically the reaction is, I would say, opportunity fire. Is that right?
Yes, but you can only fire at the unit in the last hex it entered. You don't get to fire at it in every hex it moved. Only the last hex.
I got you.
They only can move 2 or 3 hexes at most. Okay?
Right. So
it's cut up in smaller bites. You don't get to move as far.
So Mike, I'm moving. I got the initiative. I choose a platoon to move because we can only move 1 platoon at a time. Is that right?
Unless you get coordination, you get to roll coordination first. If you get coordination, you're allowed to move 2 platoons as if there are only 1.
Now, coordination, they must be adjacent to each other, these 2 leaders or these 2 platoons. Is that right?
So they can be on opposite side of the boards. It doesn't matter.
Okay. Yep. That's good. I'm trying to think like what. I guess there's radio. They can contact through radio. Is that right?
Well, it could be contact to radio, but generally you're not going to have. Your platoon leader would probably have a radio, but these are firefights, so they're probably kind of coordinated and determine what they're going to do to start with. Most of the missions don't give you enough time to, do it and then back up and do it again. In other words, if you got 30 minutes to get it done, you pretty much whatever you committed to do. If you're going to send first platoon around the left, pull him back and send. I don't know if that really helped any or not.
So let me understand here. You can, if you roll the right dice, the right numbers, you can activate 2 platoons. But let's say these platoons are like 300 yards apart. Where's the communication?
Radio.
Okay.
Well, okay.
That's what I thought.
Okay, so in World War II, they did have radio at a platoon level. But they also use runners quite extensively. Okay. Every platoon counter in the game represents a platoon leader, a radio man, a couple of runners. Okay. So, you have to abstract certain things. One of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to avoid as much detail as possible and abstract. And so players can focus on tactics. Okay. That's just one of the things that I chose to abstract.
Now this I have the initiative. I'm moving. When is the reaction? When is my opponent's reaction happening?
All right. So let me walk through the sequence of play.
Good.
All right. So you roll the die and you say you win the initiative. All right.
Right.
So you now roll for coordination. So we'll say in this example, coordination is hard to get for regular troops. And so we'll say you did not get coordination.
Okay.
So now you pick a platoon. Platoon typically has a leader, always, 3 squads and a support weapons, whatever's attached. So support weapons are going to activate with the platoon that they're stacked with or closest to.
Okay.
So machine gun section, for example, that's what's going to take place. So for example, now I'm going to say, all right, I've got in this platoon, I got a machine gun, 3 squads and a leader. All right. So I'm going to take my machine gun and I'm going to fire and suppress an enemy position. I'm now going to send one squad. I'm going to maneuver that one squad around on the left to try and get into position to encircle or flanking. Okay. I'm going to move another squad, up, advance to the front, to draw fire again. So that my first squad that goes around the left. So I'm going to hold my leader, and one squad left. They didn't do anything. So that is called the activation segment. There's only one activation segment in each platoon activation cycle. It's conducted by the active player. Now, once that activating segment is done, I call for reaction from the enemy player. Any units that he had that saw one of my units take an action can now take an action. They can move, fire, and recover. If he's got a leader somewhere else on the board, if he wanted to, anybody stacked with that leader could then also take an action. So the enemy player takes an action. He fires at both squads that I have advancing, okay? And when he's done, he calls for reaction for me. In the example, I stated that I did not do anything with my leader in the third squad.
Okay.
So now, because I'm stacked with a leader, and probably because I saw the enemy fire at my other two squads, now I can react. So now I'll take the leader and the squad left, and I'll now maneuver. I can only maneuver 2 hexes in reaction and not 3, okay? But being that I've already gotten the enemy player, I suppressed him, he's drawn fire against the other 2 guys, so I'm now taking the leader in the extra squad, and I'm going to move somewhere else, maybe around the right flank, and he doesn't get to shoot at me because he's busy shooting at those other guys, okay? So I move my guy around to the right flank. Now I call for reaction from the enemy player. If he's got somebody else that saw the leader in the squad, he can react, but he can't go back and react to the first 2 squads that moved. He can't go back and react to the machine gun. So in other words, it's encapsulated. Each segment of reaction, you can only react to what took place in the previous reaction. So I got the guy around the right flank. He's free there, no fire. So I call for reaction. The enemy player doesn't have any, so that platoon activation ends.
Okay, sorry, Mike. How does the opposing player have no reaction left?
Well, he either didn't have anybody else that saw my last leader and squad move.
Okay.
He maybe thinks that, well, I got a whole nother platoon to move. If I fire everybody, he's just going to rush me. Okay. So the enemy player has to make that decision. Or maybe that's all the units he had. He's already fired everything.
I see. Okay.
So if you're the enemy player, if I'm to have 2 platoons that I can maneuver against you and you're the enemy player, if you fire everybody at that first platoon, that means my second platoon can move and you can't do a darn thing about it.
Now, do I know that information?
What do you mean? Well,
do I know my enemy's information, where he can move or cannot move or can fire?
Well, you only get, each unit gets 1 action per game turn. You can either move, fire, recover.
Right.
So if I'm the attacking player and I'm not hidden, you see my 2 platoons on the map. Okay.
Right.
So if I move 1 platoon and you react with everything you had against him, you don't have anything left to go against the other platoon.
Yeah, I understand.
So one of the things that you want to do as especially the active player is put the enemy on the horns of dilemma. What you want to try and do if I'm attacking generally, I want to try and get within range that I can assault. Generally, I want to try and get within 50 yards. Okay. Because if I get 50 yards, then the next turn, if I win the initiative, I can just jump on you before you can even shoot.
Right.
So if I've got a guy adjacent to you, okay, and I got 2 other guys or 3 guys that left the dilemma. Well, if I don't fire, jump on me on the next turn.
Sorry, Mike, you're breaking up a little bit.
Yeah.
You broke up a little bit.
Sorry.
You're breaking up a little bit. Am I breaking up or are you breaking up?
Well, I don't know who it is.
Okay, well, you were saying if you're in position to assault, okay, you said you had another guy and he can't do anything because he doesn't have any reactions left. Now, it's still not his initiative. You can still move your platoons that haven't moved closer to that guy.
Well, only his platoon. When you're reacting, it's not activated by platoons. It's just anybody that sees an action.
Right.
Okay.
Now, is there rate of fire? Kenneth asks.
There's no rate of fire. If you get one fire and that's it.
Okay. And now we're basically right now, we're halfway through the sequence of play. Is that right?
I'm sorry?
In the explanation you did going down the sequence of play, we are right now at assault resolution phase. Is that right?
Okay, so we'll finish that. So in this particular case, we'll assume that we finished all platoon activations. They're done. All the activation and reactions finished.
Okay.
So the next thing we do is fire resolution.
That's right.
Okay. So you look at each target and you roll a die for each individual DRM marker.
Okay.
Okay. Any tank fires only against guns and tanks and vehicles. Small arms fire and mortar fire is against soft targets.
Okay.
So, you roll a die for each DRM marker. You take the most detrimental to the enemy. You apply that to the best. You apply that to the enemy unit or the unit with the best cohesion. If he fails, then the others have to take a check. If he doesn't fail, nobody else takes a check.
Now you said this is tank cannot fire on infantry?
It can. But if it's firing at infantry, it's going to place a green small arms DRMR on the infantry. If it can only fire one or the other, it can't fire anti-tank fire and infantry in the same game turn.
Okay. Okay.
He has the option. Tanks are really brutal on infantry.
And now, mortar fire. I thought that was a reaction. Mortar fire.
Mortar fire can be done in reaction or in activation.
Okay.
Okay. So let me finish the sequence of play and then I'll do the mortar fire. So you resolve all your fire. Even if you're in a hex with the enemy unit, you have to resolve the markers against your guys. All right. So once all that is resolved, any hexes that have enemy units in, you have to resolve the assault. So you add up the assault values of your units. I add up the assault values of mine. We apply any assault DRM markers, and then we make a die roll. So if it's, say, a +2, you roll a die and you add 2 to it, and you look at the result, and you go step by step and apply the results. It talks about retreat. It talks about leader casualties. It talks about other things. So the result, there's several steps in the result of the assault. Once all the assaults are completed, then you have mortar fire adjustment phase. And and I'll go over the mortar fire. And then after the mortar fire adjustment phase, you have cleanup phase. You remove your markers and get everything set for the next turn. And then you roll a die and see how much time has lapsed. So on mortar fire, okay, you have forward observers and target markers. So I try to extract it and keep it simple. So it's called, if I'm the active player and I have the activated platoon, anybody in that platoon can request mortar fire. So let's say I have third squad. He sees your machine gun in a building. I'm gonna request mortar fire to take that machine gun out. So I placed my FO, forward observer, for that particular mortar. Could be a 60 millimeter for that company, could be an 81 millimeter section or platoon. So I take my forward observer, place it in the hex with the inference unit that requested it. I placed a target marker on the target. Depending on the size of the caliber, I place a red DRM marker, less any TEMs, in the hex with the machine gun. So, for example, if that was an 81 millimeter mortar, its base value is a 2. If you were in a building, you're going to get a -2, so I would place a red 0 on top of the machine gun. And then I'm going to roll one more die, and you're going to look at the little diagram in the corner of the map. If it's 7 through 10, it lands in the target hex. That's the primary impact hex. If it's 1 through 6, it's going to land in one of the secondary impact hexes. If you're in a hex with a primary impact marker, which is the target marker, you're done.
Right.
You've got no line of sight outside the hex. You can't do anything. Now, you can withdraw, but if you come out of your improved position, you're going to take the 2 attack and not the 0 because you've given up your cover.
Right. Okay.
Right. So, in fire resolution, resolve your mortar fire just like small arms in any tank fire. At the end of the game turn, in the mortar fire adjustment phase, you have the option to extend the fire another turn. Okay, so let's say that your 81 millimeter mortar section, you would have to roll a 4. If you were not 6 off. I think we lost connection again.
Yeah. Go ahead. Resolving mortar. Your second attempt at mortar fire.
So if I chose to do so, but I rolled, greater than 4,
right?
I'm going to remove the target marker and put it in the mortar pending box. I'll flip over the forward observer. Okay. At the end of the next turn, I would now take the forward observer marker that's been flipped and put it in the mortar pending box. Okay?
Okay.
The following turn, I can roll again to start trying to recover my mortar. So I would need to for a 4 or less in a subsequent game turn to get the mortar moved from the mortar pending box into the mortar available box. So there is a process. They're just not, the bad thing about mortars, they're probably one of the most lethal weapons in World War II. But they use a high rate of fire. So you have to use very judicious in your use of mortars. Just imagine that if you fired a 3 or 4 minute mortar barrage, you may fire, if you had 2 mortars in your section and you fired 15 rounds apiece, that's 30 rounds. 9 rounds apiece, or 10 pounds apiece. That's 300 or 400. That's 300 or 400 pounds of ammo that somebody had to tote or chunk. Right. So you want to be very judicious in your use of your mortar. So it's not always. You just have to be judicious in your use of mortar, typically.
So it's funny because you said you wanted to keep this system. You wanted the system simple. You wanted it to move along. But there's still a heck of a lot of detail happening here, man.
Well, it's really a pretty simple loop. The heart of the game is the platoon activation cycle.
Right.
And it's the same for any platoon, for every single platoon you reactivate. So it just repeats. So once you get that down, it's pretty simple for the rest of it.
Okay. So that's okay.
Can you hold one? Can you hold 1 second?
Yeah, of course.
I'll be right back.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a break.
I can do for my audience right now. I can do a dance. I can sing a song. It's up to you guys, man. I can talk about my pipes. Who's it? Oh, by the way, guys, in the comments section, whoever smokes a pipe, please get in touch with me. Get in touch with me, okay? So we can smoke together, huh? What can I say, man? This is live TV, so you got to be able to dance when when the person's not there. And as a matter of fact, talking about live TV, I'm going to wait till Mike gets back. I was speaking to Harold, and I shot an idea. I wanted to do like a late night talk show thing at a con. If any of you guys or ladies or gals have any ideas, please send them to me. Let me know what you think. It's supposed to be fun, and it's supposed to be lighthearted. This is supposed to happen at a con. So near the end of the evening, say around, well, near the end of the evening. And we know that when you go to a con, there ain't no end of the evening. It's just, everybody just plays. Say around 11:30, we have this. Okay, I'll talk to you guys later. Okay, Mike, you're back.
Yes.
I was almost going to start singing a song because they said, sing a song. Wait till Mike gets back. So I did it, man. So, Mike, we were finishing now mortar, the mortar phase.
Right.
Now determine time lapse. So basically, it's just a die roll.
That's right. If you roll a 1 or 2, it's 2 minutes. If you roll, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, it's 3 minutes. 5, 6, 7 is, or let's see, 6, 7, 8 is 4 minutes, and 9 or 10 is 5 minutes.
That's amazing how much anxiety this creates. That's amazing. I'm not even playing the game, and I feel it. It's like, oh my God, this is okay. So then you got the cleanup phase. So it's really a simple system, man.
Well, it's the biggest thing. It's different. Most all tactical games, I didn't start out to be different. I just started out what I think is going to be trying to model realism and simultaneous actions as best I could.
Okay.
You know, the basis is where there's an action, there's a reaction. Okay. I mean, if you shoot at me, I'm going to shoot back.
Right.
If you come dashing out of the woods, I'm going to shoot at you. But if you're not doing anything, I'm more inclined not to shoot at all.
Right. You're gonna wait to see what you're gonna do.
Well, unless I'm on the attack and I'm going to suppress you. But the downside in that factor is this. You know, the majority of small arms combat probably took place within 100, 150, 125 yards.
Okay.
I know that machine gun can shoot 600 yards and I can shoot a rifle 400 yards. But here's the deal. When you look at human behavior, okay, you got, I'm dug in the wood line, I'm hidden, you don't know exactly where I am, and you're moving out there 250 yards, okay? Well, if I shoot at you, the best I'm hoping to do is piss you off, okay? Because I'm probably not going to have any effect at 250 yards. You're going to go to ground. And what I've done now is I've given my position away. So what's going to happen? Within 3 or 4 minutes, I'm going to be hit with mortar artillery attack, or somebody's going to pull a Panther tank around the corner and blow my ass away.
Right.
Okay. So from behavioral perspective, yeah, I ought to be able to dash at that guy that moved 25 yards between the building and 600 yards away because I saw him move there. Well, if you did see him, but real life, you may have not seen the guy, number one. And number two, why give your position away? And the other perspective is this. There's a reason they say don't fire to see whites of their eyes.
Right.
Okay? Because I want you in my kill zone.
Right.
I don't want you to be able to react and get on the radio and call in artillery, do anything like that. So really and truly, if it was up to me, I would make the ranges and the distance even smaller than they are now. But the point is combat takes place in that last 100 yards. You know, yeah, I can suppress you out at 200 yards. That's suppression fire. But I ain't doing any good, all I'm doing is keeping your head down.
That's right. Right.
You know, that's another aspect. So you want to visit about armor while we got time? Armor's pretty different.
Let's go. Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes.
So armor's probably the hardest thing to model. And I feel like we've done a really good job with the armor. Again, you know, what I said earlier, I want a player to begin to feel the pressure of that platoon leader, of that company commander, and the decisions he has to make. Okay. It's the same thing in a tank commander. Most games, including myself, you know, if I got an ASL, I got a tank running around, you know, you can empathize with moving a squad because there's men. But most people move a tank, it's just a piece of equipment. It's a vehicle. They don't think about the crew in it, okay? So, you know, I want the pressure of that tank commander to feel what it's like. Well, how do I achieve that? Well, again, I didn't plan it that way, but it's kind of turned out. Tanks die real quick.
Mm-hmm.
They're a simple kill. So if I only have 4 steps before I exceed my CDL, well, hell, the easiest thing me to do is take out your tank. So now tanks are cheap kills. So now you know, there's that pressure that, got it, you know, I got a whole company of infantry, but I'm going to lose because I lost 3 tanks already. Not so much that I lose the use of the tank, okay, but it's because they're so vulnerable. They're a cheap kill. So what I find is that you naturally now are much more cautious with your tank than you would be in other games.
I gotcha.
So the other thing about this is that tanks here, they don't get to move. They don't get 18 or 20 movement points.
Okay.
They get 4 or 5 at best, period. It takes one to start. So they move in small bites. You just can't run all the way around behind somebody and get a shot at them.
Nah, you're going to get blown up.
So tactics, tank tactics. Well, there's not just moving fire. You have 2 or 3 different types of fire. I got regular fire. I got shoot and scoot. I got halt and fire. So what is shoot and scoot? Well, if I'm stationary, I can shoot.
And take off.
And well, you never can move. You're limited to either shoot and scoot in your existing hex or an adjacent hex.
Okay.
Okay. So I got a Sherman. I'm facing a Tiger. Okay. So I'm going to shoot and scoot. I'm in a building, or not in a building, but I'm around a building. I'm going to shoot and back up behind it where he can't shoot me before he gets a shot off. Okay.
Okay.
Or if I say, for example, I got a Tiger on a hill and you're rushing me with about 5 or 6 Shermans. So I'm going to shoot. I'm going to back off down the side of the hill, putting a motion marker on my counter. So I get a shot, you don't. In the next game turn, I'm going to pull back up on the hill and do a halt and fire. So I pull back up on the hill, flip the green marker over to red, and I get a fire. Now, my fire is reduced, okay, because I moved and fired, but I get to fire first. Okay, otherwise I'd move up there, you get the fire, and then I get the fire.
Right, right.
So there's a shoot and scoot stuff. Another, you also have reverse maneuvers so that you can avoid enfilade. You have overruns. You have bypass. So there are maneuvers that tanks can do. So the other thing about the game is that how I deal with facing. It's I like to not call it facing, but it is. So really it's an enfilade. There's 2 ways you can get enfilade, during fire or maneuver. So, but it's based on the platoon activation cycle. So if I fire out 1 hex side, for that platoon activation cycle, not the game turn, just that platoon activation cycle, that 1 hex side and the 2 adjacent represents my frontal arc, and the 3 behind it represents my rear arc. So if I fire out the front, and in the same platoon action, in the same reaction, okay, if an enemy tank is behind me and reacts, and he fires through one of the rear hex side, he gets an enfilade. So he fires against the enfilade defense and not the frontal defense.
Right.
So there's no turning the counter to face it on a hex side. It's all based on where the fire enters and enters or exit the hex at the time of fire and reaction.
Now your tanks, your Sherman and your Tiger, do they have the same the same thickness and armor? What am I trying to say here, Mike? Do they have the same defense and the same offensive capabilities?
There's no Sherman.
Sorry, Mike, you're breaking up.
there's no Tiger and Sherman with the same offensive and defensive capability.
No, right. I'm just saying. How did you model that?
I look and you look at some data, and so you get a base value. Okay, so for example, a Sherman gun is a crew value.
Sorry, Mike, can you say that again? You were saying the Sherman gun, and then you cut out.
Yeah. So, for example, a Sherman tank, its gun's going to be either a 2 or 3. They're not all the same.
Right.
Okay.
I got you.
Now, a Tiger is going to be a 7 or 8.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
So, now, the Sherman armor is going to be typically a 9 or a 10. The Tiger armor is going to be 11 or 12.
Right.
It's not an even fight.
Right.
Okay. So historically, the Shermans hunted the Panthers and Tigers like a wolf pack. They all had radios. Okay. John, I'm going to move around the right flank. I want you to move 2 tanks on the flank out there in the woods so he can't shoot you. And then I'm going to pull out here and fire, and Troy's fire and suppress him. And when I do, you need to hit him in the flank. And by God, you better be there, Turkey, and don't miss, because I'm going to be dead. Okay?
That's right.
so that's how the Shermans had to approach the better tanks. So, but that's the base value of the tanks.
Okay.
So I modeled the tank values. That's the base value, but I massage that based on nationality and crew experience, and also that there's no two crews the same. The crew is the most differentiating factor in a tank. You can have a shitty tank with a really good veteran crew, and he's going to beat a great tank with a shitty crew every time.
Okay.
And that was proven over and over again on the East Front. So,
Mike, how do you get stats for the crew and stats for the tank and put them together and resolve the hit, resolve morale? How do you do that?
Well, okay. So your tank has a armor value.
Right.
Let's say a Sherman has an armor value of 10.
Right.
Okay. And I'm firing at that with a Tiger. Oh, well, no, let's pick a Panzer IV.
Okay.
75 long. So Panzer IV is going to be a 4 or a 5. So let's say I got a 5. So it's the same thing as small arms. If I'm firing at your Sherman, and let's say you're 14 hexes away, all right, I'm a 5 base, -1 for range, because it's now medium range, okay? So I take a yellow marker, and I put a 4 marker on you. 5 - 1 is a 4.
Right.
Right? So when time comes for fire resolution, I roll a 10-sided die, and I add 4 to it. And if it's greater than 10, you die. If it's equal, you're shot.
Okay, so if the tank gets hit, the crew's dead, period.
Everybody's out.
Right, okay, so there's no individual, there's no individual, yeah.
Again, these are firefights. The crew, historically, there was like 1 3/4 crewmen died for every tank destroyed. Okay? Statistically. So those crews get out. But whether they died or whether they abandoned their tank, it doesn't matter for the game.
Right, the tank is out of order. Right.
For the game purposes, that tank is not participating anymore.
Right, I got you.
Okay? So they may recovered it at the end of the day. But for the shortness of this firefight, it's done.
It's gone. I got you. Man, it's funny. I just had another question concerning the tank. We have leaders and we have platoon leaders. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Do the platoon leaders have a base defense and a base offensive, or are they all the same?
Are you talking about tank platoon?
No, I'm talking about infantry.
No, he's got an assault value of 1, for example. Your typical squad will either have assault values of 2s or 3s.
Okay. Same thing for the opponent, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And generally the cohesion which is your morale, if you want to call it.
Right.
For an infantry, all your non-vehicle or infantry units are either going to be 5, 6, or 7s. Okay?
Okay.
All right, because it varies. You may have a platoon and you may have 1 7, 1 6, and 1 5. You never know what you're going to get because not all squads are equivalent. So the platoon leader is going to have a cohesion of 5, 6, or 7. He's got an assault value of 1. He's got no firepower value. Okay? They don't shoot. Now, you know, you get into assault, they figure in the assault, but they don't shoot.
Right.
If you lose a platoon leader, he goes on, you look at whatever time it is. So let's say the time is 15 minutes. You lose a platoon leader, you add 7. So you'll put it on the 22-minute marker, and that platoon leader's out of play until you reach 22 minutes. And while he's out of play, nobody can be activated in his platoon.
Bloody hell. Okay, okay.
They can react, okay? They can react, but basically that platoon's not really going to take, it can't fire at anybody. It can't move or do anything unless it sees something.
Bloody hell. That's good, man. I like that. Now, a general question here, Mike. 20 years ago, you think you could have designed this game and your wargaming experience? Because as you play war games, obviously you ingest mechanics, this, that. So 20 years ago, you think you could have created the system?
Probably not. I never really wanted to design a game. It just kind of happened.
How did it just kind of happen? Because it takes a long time, a lot of effort, a lot of research. So you must have wanted to do it somehow.
So I'll try and make it as short as possible. All right. Prior to moving back here, this in my home when I grew up, I lived in Houston and Austin, and I had large gaming groups, and we played all the time. And the one in Austin was real big on ASL, so I played a lot of ASL. Well, I moved back to Palestine. There's hardly any gamers here. I live in the country, so I actually reunited with the cousin I hadn't seen in 20 years, who was a Vietnam vet. He had never seen a board game in his life. So I said, hey, why don't you come up, we reconnect, we drink a few beers, and we'll play a few games. Well, we tried. He didn't care for operational. He kind of liked tactical, but ASL, and he ain't going to read the rules. He just wants to come here and play.
Right.
So we literally pulled counters from one game and a map from another, and it's just like the old plastic toy soldiers. You know, we pushed them around and everything, and so, you know, after 3 or 4 weeks or a month, I said, God, I got to start writing some of this shit down because I forgot what we was doing last time. So we rocked along for a year or two, you know, and then you get 2 or 3 pages of rules. And, you know, I then started making extra maps, and I found a lady, her name is Liz Stefano, who does all the maps. I found her on the internet somehow, and I said, well, I want you to start doing the art for my map. So I had 52 maps that she did for me before I ever approached anybody. So we just played at home. I made homemade counters and everything. We just played at home. And, you know, over time, I would visit with friends and gamer friends, and, oh, you got something here. You need to market this game. I don't want to mess with it. So finally I did listen, and Dean Essig of the Gamers, Multiman Publishing, I'd been to his event, in Homer, Illinois, HomerCon 2 or 3 times, and a couple of times actually. And I said, well, I really respected Dean. I think his OCS was just outstanding, and I respect him as a designer. So I called Dean one day and I said, Dean, I got a game. You know, we're not best of friends, but I mean, he knew who I was. I said, I think I got a game. People encouraged me to do it, you know, and would you look at it? I'm not looking for you to purchase the game or show it to anybody. I want your opinion. So I got in the car and I drove all the way from Texas to Illinois, and we sat in his kitchen for a day and a half, and we pushed counters around. And so he seemed to like it pretty well, and, you know, basically said, well, you can change everything, but don't let anybody change your initiative. Don't let anybody change that. Okay. I said, all right. And he wrote me a little blurb. All right. Well, I'd noticed on the internet, I didn't know GMT from Adam. I didn't know who they were. You know, I had several GMT games, but I liked their productions, and they did a good job. So I don't remember how I saw it, but it says, Weekend at the Warehouse in October. So I said, well, we're going to have some designers present. And I thought to myself, well, shit, I'm a designer. So I called and said, well, I'm a designer. I want to come to your event. So we set it up and everything. So I flew to San Diego. Well, actually, I flew to San Jose and drove down to Hanford. And I get there, and, I didn't know anybody. And I first little lady I come across, I said, well, who owns and runs GMT? And they said, well, that guy right over there, he's the one. I said, well, what's his name? He says, his name is Gene. So I went over to Gene and said, Gene, look, I think I got a good game here, and I want you to look at it. And bless his heart, Gene's very fair, great guy. And he says, well, okay. So he played for about an hour, and he said, well, seems pretty interesting, but, there's a lot of competition in that field, Combat Commander and ASL and Hero, Conflict of Heroes. And so he said, well, I'm going to have, so he had some of his lieutenants or guys that he knew. Mitch Land was one of them, and 2 or 3. And so over the weekend, he had some of those guys play, and so I think we got a fairly decent review. And I had the little blurb that Dean had sent with me, said they ought to give me a chance. So, and it went pretty good. And then I went home and said, well, if we take the next step, I want you to talk to Tony and Mark. So a month or 2 later, I get a call. And so I'm going up to visit with Mark and Tony. And we sat in Tony's dining room and drug out the game, and Tony and Mark played, and we played a mission. And so, Tony, they seemed to like it really well and talk about this and that. And said, well, we'll get back to you. And I don't know, that was December, probably January, February. Gene called and says, all right, we're willing to do your game. So
what was the time lapse between the weekend and the when they called you?
I don't know. The first time, maybe a month. Second time, another month.
So did you shop it around while waiting?
No, I didn't want to do anybody but GMT.
I see.
They did quality games, number one. Number two, nobody's going to give me the exposure that GMT can.
So what happens if it was a no?
I don't know. I didn't think about it.
Wow. You're a determined guy, Mike.
Well, the game was, honestly, the game sold itself. I mean, I want a better mousetrap. I mean, I'm the designer, and I've played a lot of these other games. This is just a better game, okay? There's lots of chaos here, and small unit combat is chaos. There's nothing predictable, okay? There's nothing predictable in warfare. No. You never know when all of a sudden that tiger's going to show up, or you never know when, that squad that was supposed to be on right flank got lost. So it's all about chaos. And I think the game does an outstanding job of modeling the chaos of small unit combat. And it's one of those things that, when you play, you're never out of it. It's not like playing ASL. I had my key position was an 88, and he took it out. Now I'm just going to let this guy beat on me for the next 5 turns because I'm going to lose.
Right.
So, okay. The initiative is really a big part because, it's not like, I may get to go 4 or 5 times in a row before you ever get to go. I may win the initiative 5 times. So the initiative is kind of like the momentum thing.
Right.
Football. Hell, you're up 14 points and everything's going your way, and you have an interception. They run it back for a touchdown. Well, shit, Okay, well, now that's a game changer. You could just see the shoulders slump on the other team. Mm-hmm. So it's the same thing as combat, and I just think it models this type of combat much better than the others, and it's nothing detrimental against the other.
I understand.
So anyway,
that's great. I
think it sold itself.
So I'm assuming we're going to be getting battle packs and this and that and tournament packs on this system.
Well, I mean, that's where I'd like to be, but all that takes manpower and, you know, volunteers. There ain't no money in this business.
I know, man.
So, you know, I'm always trying to recruit play testers.
I know.
One thing I ended up being designer developer. And so in some ways that's probably good. In other ways, it's really tough to try.
Oh, so you were the developer in your own game?
Yeah.
Okay.
I never developed anything or designed anything.
I understand.
So I've made a lot of mistakes. So it's just, you know, I wouldn't doubt that I spend 30 hours a week at it every week.
No, I know it's a long thing. Like, I mean, from A to Z, how long did it take you to do the last 100 yards, volume 1?
Well, I don't know. I probably started playing when I met my cousin. We probably started pushing things around. So probably 7, 8 years ago. 9 years.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Man, that's a long time.
It's a grind, but I enjoy it. It's an opportunity for me to give back to the gaming community. I still enjoy playing the game. You know,
that's great. I mean, I got to get myself into this game, and like you, I don't have anybody around because I live in the country. So some guy asked, and the same thing I asked, like how much I mean, I think replayability is 100% here, and solo ability, well, like you said, it depends on scenario.
Look, there is a tremendous Mark Rivet, who lives in Canada. I can't remember exactly where. He's doing the Vassal module. There is an outstanding Vassal module available to play this game. And, you know, just get on Discord or Skype, find your opponent on Vassal, and that's the best way to play and learn the game.
I guess, yeah, that is the best.
You know, if you're willing to do so, I'll be glad to sit down and play one on Vassal with you to give you the ropes.
I appreciate that.
So but yeah, face to face is the best way to play the game.
Yeah. And so let's say I'm playing against you. Are you going to give me some quarter? Or you're going to give me no quarter?
No quarter, dude.
I knew it.
Hey, you learn by experience.
Yeah, but how many times can I die?
I help you out, but you know, it's it's been a very, what I like too is when we moved to Airborne over Europe, one of the big questions is, well, how are we going to model elite units versus a regular unit? Okay. So most of the time, the easiest thing is to say, well, shit, I'm going to give them more firepower and I'm going to make their morale and cohesion better. Okay. Well, but that's not true because the freaking Airborne used the same M1 Grand that the regular infantry did. Okay. And they probably weren't any better shots. Right. So how can you increase the firepower? Well, that's not valid. Okay. Second, disruption in the game, your cohesion, or when a unit gets disrupted, it's not a rout. What it basically means, it's just gone to ground and temporarily is not participating in the fight. Okay. So if, you know, the elite units are just as smart as the regular units. If they're taking a hell of a lot of fire, they're going to go to ground. Right. Right. They're going to stand up and take the shit. So how can you make cohesion any better than a regular unit? So I couldn't justify that. So what was the difference? Well, besides training and better quality selection to start with, is the team coordination, the esprit de corps. So what's the big factors? Okay. Well, first off, most all your leaders are going to have a 7 of cohesion. Okay. Number one. Number two, I may disrupt and go to ground just as quick as the next guy. But in the game, I get a +1, or I get actually a -1 on my recovery roll. So I'm going to recover faster. I'm elite. I'm going to get back in the game.
I got you. Okay.
Okay. But the really, really big factor is this. In the cohesion roll, you got to have an 8 or better. In coordination, you have to have an 8 or better for regular infantry. Okay. If you're elite, you get a +3.
Okay.
Okay. So 50% of the time, I'm going to get coordination. Well, what does that really result in? Well, what that means is I can move 6 or 8 units to your 3. And I'm going to encircle you a whole lot quicker. So that represents the teamwork, okay, and the training, the working as a team the elite units have over the regular units. It's not necessarily they don't shoot any better. You know, they're not stupid. They're going to go to ground like everybody else. So by doing subtle things, because they had a lot more initiative at a lower level.
Right.
So same token came. So I like that. That was fascinating, and it works in the game.
Right.
And you take PTO, the Japanese. Well, how do you model the Japanese? What's different about these guys? Okay. Well, the Japanese historically were much more willing to take casualties in order to achieve their objective.
Right.
Okay. So if you're on the PTO, if you're the American player, if you try and fight the Japanese like you do the Germans, you're going to suck ass. Because the Japanese were tremendous jungle fighters. So if we can get you close range, that was their whole thing. Look, the Japanese spent most of their dollars on their Navy. The Army was secondhand, okay? And they were tremendous soldiers, but they had their weapon systems were not as good, nor did they have as much. The Americans had more men, more artillery, more ships, more planes, more everything. So the Japanese, when they get you in the jungle, dude, they're tough.
Yeah, they're tenacious. Yeah.
So it's gonna play much different, which is refreshing. So it's gonna take, anytime you change from playing Europe to the Pacific, it's going to take you a mission or two to kind of refresh yourself on how you got to deal with these Japanese players. Now, from a Japanese perspective, you know, you want to catch, you want to assault. You want to get as close as you can to the enemy. You're gonna get hammered if you're out in the open, okay, with all American assets.
Right.
So the Japanese, for example, typically most of their cohesions are 7. They don't disrupt. They just take a casualty and keep coming.
Right. Okay.
So, and so it's a whole different play, which I think is interesting. And now we're looking at the differences in the Russians. Well, the Russians were like the Japanese in the sense that they were willing to take high casualties, but for different reasons.
Yeah, they had a commissar up their ass.
Well, commissar, but really and truly, you were just poorly trained. You were cannon fodder, and we're just going to send the numbers. The Japanese, it was more the Bushido code. We're going to die for the emperor. Okay.
Honor. Yeah.
So, but the biggest thing for the Russians we're finding is the initiative level. You know, you just didn't do anything unless you were told. And if you were a platoon or a company leader, you know, you wanted to make sure you made a good show, or they may just court-martial your ass, okay?
That's right.
So, for example, you know, if I'm a company commander, if I didn't lose at least half my company in the effort to take that position, they may take me out back and shoot me, okay? So, for example, the initiative, if it's equivalent on a squad, okay, you take an American, German, or British platoon, each unit in that platoon can conduct a separate action because the initiative at squad level. Well, you take a Russian squad, that's not going to be the case. Excluding recovery, okay? If you have a Russian platoon, when you activate it, if one fires, they all have to fire. If one maneuvers, they all have to maneuver. So you activate a platoon to maneuver, or you activate that platoon to fire. Okay? Because at a squad level, they didn't have the initiative down there. Whereas in an American or German platoon, you know, I can have one squad fire and one platoon and then one squad maneuver. So you just up one echelon or whatever you want to call it.
Level.
Right. So I'm going to have now for the Russian, you'll have machine gun platoons, They didn't divvy out their machine guns like the Americans and Germans did.
Right, right.
Machine gun platoon, you'll have a platoon leader for that machine gun. Well, he's going to provide your fire support, and now you're going to take 2 Russian infantry platoons. It's both going to maneuver. They were typically not well trained as the Germans were, so the cohesion's not going to be as good.
I understand.
So when you look at this, it's hard to model history. And okay, there's always exception, but in general, overall picture and the East Front, when you really study, is the Russians had numbers and the Germans had quality.
Yes.
Okay, so if you look at the big picture, that's what I'm trying to model. Otherwise, you can't model history. Okay?
You're right.
All right. The better example is this: Russian tanks. The T-34 was as good or better than anything the German had early in mid-war. Okay? But why did they lose 5 or 6 tanks to the Germans 1? It wasn't because of the T-34 tank. It was because their crews were so poorly trained. They were no different than infantry. They treated their tanks the same thing. We're just going to overwhelm you with tanks. Right. I read an article actually, and I've read a lot. It's kind of, this game has been different. It's like I did things and then I did the research afterwards. It's kind of funny how that worked.
Okay.
I never really did the research and say, this is how this ought to be. I always went by feel. And now, you look out, well, that works pretty good.
Okay.
So you take the Russian tanks. It's the same for both sides. They lost tanks to anti-tank guns and tanks, but, it's still the same on both sides. They outproduced the Germans in armored vehicles 2-1. Well, half the Germans are on the West Front, okay? So really, it's maybe 3-1. But they still managed to kill 5 or 6 tanks for every German tank eliminated.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, it's not the tank, it's the crew. So what do I do? Well, I'll change the values. I only have 2 or 3 values on the counter that I can play with. So I'll take a Russian T-34 and I reduce its gun and its defensive value comparatively to, say, an equivalent piece of machinery. That represents the difference in the tank crew. But they're just going to have more of them. Yeah.
Okay. Mike, I'm going to ask you a last question. And this is awesome. This is the first interview I ever do that's an hour and a half. Trust me. So this is a delicate question. How do you model the Italians? And let me say, I am one. So how do you model the Italians?
Well, I haven't got there yet, okay?
Okay, well.
But generally, they had poor equipment. They had inferior equipment, number one, except for maybe their Navy. They had inferior equipment. They had inferior leadership. Beyond that, the Italian soldier was just as good as the next guy, I guess. Logistics sucks. They just didn't have the manufacturing, the support capability, okay? It's not fair to say the Italian soldier was not as good as any other soldier, okay? He just didn't have all the benefits of the training and the equipment that the other armies had, okay?
Yeah.
So I don't know. We hadn't got to the Italians. That's a long way down the road. But, and when you're looking at squad level, how many squads were there in World War II? When you look at Russian squad, German squads, Italian squads, how many squads were there? Hundreds of thousands of squads probably. Well, okay. Well, probably for every good Italian squad, there was a shitty squad. And for every good German squad, there was a shitty squad. So at this scale of the game, okay, how do you know what you're going to get?
Right, right.
So I try and vary a little bit in the squad level stuff. So I don't know. I hadn't really thought about the Italians.
I know. Richard Berg. I forget which game it was, but he had the Italians, and he had one rule that the Italians passed the water or something like that. It's like, what the hell?
That's campaign for North Africa.
Oh.
Okay, hey Dan.
Hey,
when you get a little time, okay, we need to pick a mission, and I'll play you on the vassal, and you'll get a better feel for how the game plays.
Okay. That's great. I'm looking forward to that.
We can do it in an hour or two. My wife has gone out of town all this next coming week. So one evening when you get time, we can do a vassal. We'll do mission number 1 in the first module.
What time do you?
I don't go to bed till 11 or 12 o'clock.
Your time, that is, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, not my time. You see what I'm saying?
But I mean, we could start at 6 or 7 your time. 8.
Yeah. Look, let me read the rules a little bit. I'm a really bad reader, and I'm a really bad play tester, and I'm gonna lose.
Well,
at least I'm gonna learn the game.
Be sure to go to the P500 page, download the latest rules and charts.
And what was it? Version 1.1?
It should be 1.2. And that what
Okay.
you have? Okay, so you have the latest published rules.
That's right.
Okay. There's some errata. You can find some errata on the P500 page.
Yeah.
We'll play by those, but there's a version 2.0 that will come out with PTO that's been updated. And so.
Okay. Mike, we're going to end it here. I really appreciate your time and your expertise, man. I'm telling you. And I'm going to do my professional outgoing music and all that. Stick around, and thank you very much.
Hey, you going to go to the Consign World?
You mean in Arizona?
Yeah.
Nah.
Man, it's a hoot.
I know, man. I live in Montreal, man.
They got airplanes.
Okay, Mike, I'm going to end the show. I'll just wait.
All right.